tonight to learn about Cuba. We'll start with the presentation. Following the presentation, we will then take a little break while we clear the floor because we're going to have a dance performance with Chini and Hanna.
So he's from Matanzas, and he's been in Minnesota, what, 5 years? 5 years. And he teaches an amazing, wonderful, awesome instructor here in the Twin Cities.
During that time, we'll be taking bids for the silent auction. So as I'm sure most of you saw, we have a table of silent auction items, cigars, a bottle of Cuban rum, and some amazing portraits, photography. So here we go. I want to see some hands raised with the first word that comes to mind when you see this. Fidel?
Salsa dancing.
Salsa?
Communism.
Cigar.
Cigars?
Oppression.
Oppression?
Cars.
Cars. Yeah?
Uranium.
Hmm? Oh. Well, great. You just ruined the whole presentation of that. No.
That was intentional.
I don't know. Fighting? Spirit? Sure. We have really two very different sides, right? And in a way, they're kind of opposite. And this will be a theme throughout the talk. And I think provide a window through which invites our interaction with the island. And in fact, kind of takes us back to what we're all here for tonight. So, let us proceed with Cuba, from us to you. Let's start with some Cuba 101. Yes, Americans can travel to Cuba. Now in 2014, Barack Obama went to Cuba, I think it was December, and he met with the, not Fidel, Fidel by then had already retired and had handed over all the power to his brother Raul. And Obama and Raul Castro met, and they began to loosen up some of the restrictions between the two countries. We can't go to Cuba. You just can't go to sit on the beach. You have to fit into one of 12 reasons to go to Cuba. Now you might think, oh great, I just want to go and see the country, so I'm probably not going to fit into one of these 12. Actually, I think chances are you will fit into one of these 12 because one of them is the vaguely worded support for the Cuban people. And that is fairly easy to fulfill because if you stay in a guest house that is privately owned or you eat at a restaurant that is privately owned, which are things you would probably do anyway, then that is part of supporting the Cuban people. There are direct flights to Cuba from the U.S. I went from Atlanta, but you can also go from southern Florida, you can go from New York, you can go from Houston. One thing that does remain restricted is business relations with Cuba. So I know there was whispers of a Starbucks opening in Havana in 2015. It never happened and it still hasn't happened. Google wanted to provide the internet for Cubans, and that was something that the government did not allow them to do, which when I talked to a Cuban about it, he said at first he was upset because Google was going to provide broadband internet access across the island, and that would have been great. But then he said, on second thought, I didn't want my internet controlled by Google, so I'm actually glad the government restricted the internet. Pick your poison, I guess. So I arrived, and boom, that was my window seat, looking down on Cuba. I get to the airport, leave the terminal, and in January it's so nice to walk outside and see palm trees out here, and there's actually a big highway here, and along them, yes, I saw plenty of classic cars. One of which was the car that would take me to the bus stop in Havana, where I would then take a vehicle down to the city. I would meet Hanna in Trinidad. Let me show you how I arrived in this car to Cuba with a short video. What's your name?
Hanna. First time for Cuba. Ya, bueno, vine a recoger a Brandon por su primera vez. Aquí vamos a salir.
So how about them cars? Well, that's the one that picked me up. And then obviously you see there's a whole line of them. A lot of the taxis are old cars. This is a taxi that is in the city of Trinidad. This guy would take me and Hannah around to several places. And what I think is his 54 Chevy. I did notice in his car the steering wheel was of a Kia and the key was a Hyundai. Which I don't know how that would work in the ignition of a 54. They make do. They work on them in the streets. You pray that this jack doesn't give way. All right, now these beauties are taxis that will drive you around Old Havana. You know, it's gone from necessity. Well, the U.S. isn't going to ship us any more cars. I guess we're stuck with what we got. I guess we'd better make sure that these last a long time. To now where it's become an identity. And, you know, the guys like to have a nice car, like they do, you know, in a lot of places in the world. And now the tourists come, and the tourists love the cars too. So it's just become a thread in the fabric of Cuba today. And the cigars were plentiful. Here's a couple of photos. So I think these were props, I hope. And this guy was taking pictures with tourists. This woman, just by her appearance and the fact that she had a cat in a stroller, was just asking for a photo, and I wasn't going to let her walk by without me getting one. So she posed. I'll say this later about the Cuban people too. They were almost invariably photogenic, and that's cool, right? I mean, that's not what you see. And if you go to a foreign country and you ask to take someone's picture, they might grumpily say, "Okay, fine." They might be a little reluctant. They might outright say, "Well, no," but rarely would someone rebuff my advance if I asked for their photo. Cubans were just very open to that. And this gentleman approached me on the streets in Trinidad. He motioned me over as I was walking the streets of Trinidad, just getting to know the town. And I followed him into his place where he had eggs, rum, and cigars for sale inside. And so I bought one of his cigars, and this is a little bit of our exchange. Cohiba, rum, juegos. ¿Cuántos cohiba? Dos por una. Okay. You really had something. It was just chemistry so thick. I don't think he loved my camera, to be honest. But hey, you know what? I used to sell too. I used to sell insurance door to door. So I give it up to guys who do the sales life. And I bought one of his 2 peso cigars, and it was, you know, shoddily wrapped and dry, and but he's hustling, you know, he's doing his thing. So, okay, that's a little overview of Cuba. Now we get into a little deeper, thanks to the activities and experiences provided by my guide. So, Hanna's domain is around Trinidad, which is an old city, almost to the year, 500 years old. They just celebrated their 500-year anniversary. I think it was 1514 was the date that the Jesuit, or maybe just General Catholic mission started on this city. And I will show you Trinidad now through that taxi driver with the old Chevy, with the Kia steering wheel, and the Hyundai key. As you'll see, the machine did work. So that was all Trinidad. I just like how you open a door up, you know, the front door of the house or a business, and you walk right out onto the street, right? It's almost as if, and with the community feel of Cuba being so strong, it's almost as if the road is a hallway, and the doors are like entrances into apartments or dorms even. They might just leave it open, and then neighbors will just come in and out. It's so community oriented. And that was a nice thing to feel, you know, whereas we live in our own little independent homes here. He was taking us to the beach, so you saw that water in that last video. And indeed, that was one of the enjoyable things Hanna provided. We did some dancing on the streets of Trinidad, horseback riding to a waterfall, and again, that community feel. So this is the family and extended family, some of whom don't live there, but many of these individuals that do. So to have had Hanna there to help me have that on this trip was just invaluable. And so while I call this part of Cuba from Hanna to me, I'll then say from Hanna to you, and invite Hanna to introduce herself and share a few things about what she does to bring people down to Cuba.
Okay, well, I would really just like to start off by saying it's not me, it's really the Cuban people who I want to give thanks to for allowing us into their homes and really opening their hearts to the people from the U.S. I just feel like super blessed to be able to go there and take people there, and it's been like one of the most amazing things in my life. Get to know the people of Cuba, even if you go with the group, and just get to know the culture and the people in the streets of Cuba. So, thanks, Brandon.
Well, since you're talking about travel to Cuba, Hanna has graciously offered $100 voucher for one of her trips for any individual to go. So, who will it be?
Okay. Jeffrey Carlson. All right.
I win.
I just said you're gonna win.
Well, she was right.
He needs to
There you
go.
Thank
yes.
you.
Yeah.
Great.
Well, now we get to the part of the presentation where we talk a little bit more about Cuba, its expressive side countered by its restricted side. And a part I call Cuba, both sides of the coin. Now, as introduced at the beginning, we have these aspects of salsa dancing, the boxing, the pride, right? So much of Cuba that they want to express, and this is what I encountered all over the place. I call it the bright side. So the people, like I said, at one point I was taking photos I was photographing a person on the street of Havana, and I heard this voice yelling, and I didn't know. But I looked up, and there was a woman who was just pointing at herself. An old woman, like, I want my picture taken. So up I go, zoom in, and I don't run in. That's not common. That was very nice. And in this shot, we've seen this shot earlier, but I want to point out the architecture. Because to American, at least to me, and I'm guessing to a lot of Americans, what we know about Cuba starts in the late 50s, right? Because it's all about the revolution, it's all about the Cuban Missile Crisis, it's all about the Bay of Pigs, it's all about how we can't go there, and how we want their legendary awesome cigars, right? It's a mysterious island, we don't know much about it. And so when I toured Old Havana, to me there were like two periods of architecture that really stuck out, especially around Old Havana. There was the late 1800s, early 1900s architecture. You're talking about a huge opera house, the Capitol building, old hotels, and you just felt like you were going to see some flappers and some gangsters with Tommy guns. I mean, it's just that kind of architecture, that roaring 20s feel. And then you've got the ancient stuff, like in this city, the 500-year-old city, and then Old Havana, you've got like this old church and this old fort, and And it wasn't just like one or two buildings, it was almost like a whole neighborhood unto itself. And I just thought, my God, Havana was just such an amazing city. It was just like the heartbeat of Latin America, or maybe just of the Caribbean. And I didn't know this, because all I know of Cuba, again, is just, like I said, from the late 50s onward. And let's watch a little video of these guys. These guys are just playing in the streets of Trinidad. That's Hanna. I think they would play whether there were people there or not.
Every morning.
They just play there. Because why not, right? I mean, and along with the music is the visual art. So this is a guy in one of several souvenir shops. And yeah, you've got some of the ordinary kind of figurines and magnets and, you know, that kind of stuff. But you've got these incredible paintings too. And the volume of them is incredible. And this was in Trinidad, and this was in Havana. I was simply walking on a street, some random street in the city, and I looked to my left, and there was a couple of French-style doors wide open. It was just this one dude's house. He was in there by himself. He had his motorcycle in there, and then he had his paintings there. On that note, I want to give Mariesa a chance to share what she does. She's the founder of the Cuban-American Art Exchange, and she'll talk more about that right now.
Hi. My name's Mariesa, and I'm the director of U.S. Cuba Artist Exchange. Thank you. And I've been taking groups to Cuba since 2013, basically. Similar to what Hanna does, mostly for cultural exchange, but also artists to do collaborations in Cuba. And then the other part of the organization is bringing Cuban artists here to do collaborations, to do different workshops and education here, to learn new skills and to learn more about being connected on the internet and being an independent business person.
You want to talk a little bit about the artists?
Oh yeah, the photos that are displayed over there are by this artist named Valenti. He's from Cienfuegos, Cuba. My favorite one is the one of the guy sitting in the chair. That's his house. Seems like it might be crumbling a little bit, but he has his bottle of rum and his tobacco, his cigar. The name of the photo is Satisfaction. And Valenti told me that he just wanted to capture this guy because even though he had pretty much nothing or very little and his house was falling apart, that he was just happy with the simple things in life that they enjoy in Cuba, which is probably like music, rum, and tobacco. I thought I would mention that since I started going to Cuba in April 2012, they have been able to travel freely, I mean kind of, if they have the money to get a $100 passport and do, you know, their interviews and things like that. They can buy and sell cars now, so they have a real estate market and property market that has been starting to develop. They got cell phones in, I think it was 2008, so that was before me. And then they started opening up many different private businesses that they could have between that time of 2008 and when I got there. So it's been very interesting to see the development of the economy and all the things that have changed. So,
Mariesa,
yeah.
You want to draw another name?
Sure.
This is for, let's do a copy of my book, which I know you're all dying to have. So this was a book that I wrote about a year I lived in China. It's called Life Learned Abroad, Lessons on Humanity from China. I lived there from 2010 to 2011, and similar to the lessons that I'll be sharing later in this talk about Cuba, I had about a year's worth of time in China to really flesh out what their world versus our world and kind of the lessons that boiled to the surface as a result of that. There's a lot of photos, that's why it's such a thick book. And the person taking it home tonight will be
Chef K.
Oh my God.
I want it signed.
Yeah. Okay, and for one last example of the bright Cuba spirit. Now, Hanna, was this? Remember the New Year celebration on the street? Was that planned or was that spontaneous?
It was planned.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay, I was hoping you'd say spontaneous, because then that would be like more like,
No.
holy cow.
Yeah.
It seemed spontaneous, like this all people just suddenly got together,
Right.
out came the trumpet and the drums and whatever else they were using, and they just all started.
But
I don't
that
know, they
would
acted like-
happen spontaneously.
Yeah, I believe it. It
Yeah.
felt that way. Anyway, this is New Year's Eve at midnight, 2 months ago or so. Yeah, she made sure everyone was satisfied.
Yeah.
All right. Well, from the bright, we now talk about the blight. This is Havana too, and this is not out of the ordinary. Some buildings literally look like they've been bombed, and I think it's simply 60 years of neglect, as I assume happens when a central agency tries to control and disperse all responsibility and then try to handle everything through that one little bottleneck. Things don't get done. And no private property. It's sometimes hard to find what you need. And perhaps worse, you then have, so these are a couple of headlines I'm going to show you. Migration crisis of Cubans overflows to the government of Panama. So in a minute I'm going to show you a photo of a guy I interviewed in Havana who opened up about his thoughts on the government, which was very brave of him. And he told me that within the last 5 years, foreign countries, almost, maybe all, I don't know, but almost all, Cubans need a visa to go to their country. Ecuador got rid of that restriction for a period of time. And according to Juan, whose picture you'll see shortly, he said thousands of Cubans poured into Ecuador. They didn't need a visa, off they went. Some stayed, some went to neighboring countries, and evidently many of them saw Ecuador as the first stop on their way to the United States. So, to get to the US, you got to go through Central America. And Panama was overrun with Cuban refugees. It wasn't long and Ecuador put the wall up and said, we need a visa. But not before many Cubans left. The ones that stay, a Cuban activist loses her life's work to the regime and speaks out again. So, admittedly, this is a woman who likes to, she likes to poke at the government and see what she can get away with. And for doing so, they detain her, they jail her, and in this case, they went through her home and took all of her digital media, which was her life's work. And that's it. It's gone. Her writing, I think was mainly, she's mainly a writer. It's a poor country. You see this in a lot of poor countries, but it just, some things I couldn't ignore. So, Cuba has these two sides. Mariesa mentioned a lot of ways they're loosening up. And those are radical changes. Yet comparatively, the country is still it's still in a shell. When you have a country that's isolated, figuratively and literally like Cuba is, how that clashes with humanity in 2018. See, I'm really into the idea of the free flow of how things are going about, right? The free flow of ideas, of people, of resources. And now with the internet and with new technologies like blockchain happening, so much is being done in this flowing manner. And I just put together a few photos exemplifying this all over the world. LeBron James goes to China, and we've got this Western dude who's a well-known Tibetan Buddhist. Now we've got Wolverine with Psy, who is a South Korean pop star, doing the South Korean pop star's dance. Qtum, which is it's not a boy band, it's a blockchain startup. You have 2 East Asians, 3 Caucasians, and 1 Central Asian guy. Something I found called the African Yoga Project. Tiger Mom brought her Chinese style of parenting, wrote about it in a book. Those are her daughters. Cubs, I guess. While we imported some of China's harsh parenting style, we exported, and we as Americans exported, some harsh music in the form of the Taiwanese death metal band. I think we have some music of them right now. And then we have Cuba in 2018. This is the man I interviewed. He was confronted by a government official because he posted something about Cuba's government on Facebook. Yeah.
You're talking about how the government's a little bit different there. A friend of mine, Max, and I were in Havana over New Year's when you were in Trinidad. And as you know, Raul and Fidel Castro pictures are everywhere.
Yeah.
My friend Max was standing right, excuse me, right below a Raul Castro poster where he's singing. I asked my friend Max to mimic him and take a picture of them. We almost got ran out of that community because you just cannot do that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In this community or in this country where we can make as much fun or talk as bad or as good, whatever administration is in, you cannot do that in Cuba.
Yeah, I was just struck by coming back from Cuba and then, seeing any article about Trump in the Washington Post and the New York Times, and the way they talk about Trump is just, I'm glad we have that freedom, but it's a complete 180 from Cuba. So when he goes on camera on this YouTube video, and he says all the government cares about is power. He talks about their socialist system choking off economic development. He knows the risks.
They have a whole system to, try to keep tabs on what people are saying.
Yeah, and
it's multidimensional.
He wants to look back and say, I had the courage to speak out, at least for a moment. And I want to know that. I want my kids to know that. Cuba has cracks though too, right? Even in this day and age. The previous slide was showing all these examples of how we have all this flow of information and art and ideas and people and all that. Cuba's restricted, but it's still got its cracks in its armor. The guy who had the cigars and the eggs and the rum for sale, that's illegal. You can't just sell out of your house like that. But he does it, right? He needs to make a few extra pesos. There's a lot of people that do that. In fact, the story that I have that's really interesting. So a guide that Hanna handed me off to one night took me up a hike up to the highest point in Trinidad, where they have a radio tower. And we get up there, and the gate is wide open, and in we walk. So we're on the grounds of this communications little area, right? I mean, this is a country's communications infrastructure. This is pretty important stuff to a country's security. And we walk right into the gate. There's the tower, sending radio or TV signals and all that. And we walk by the server room, and I see the blinking lights on the servers, and I'm like, that's a server? He's like, yeah, don't go in there. And so we end up taking a ladder up to the rooftop of the building there. And so we get an even better view, right? Because it's all about giving the tourists a good view. And he's like, just don't get any of the buildings in the picture. Now, I wanted to write about this, but I didn't want to get my guy in trouble. But he wasn't the only one doing this either. So there was another group ahead of us, and there was another group following us. And I asked him, well, where's the guard? What's going on? He's like, well, the guard, I pay the guard. We guides, we pay the guard a little bit of money because he makes $14 a month. So it's some of their most sensitive aspects to national security are being undermined, right, by the fact that their country isn't managed. And then I also got a kick of how the guard was in his guardhouse watching something on his TV, and in the windowsill there was like 1 7-Up, 1 water, 1 Red Bull, 1 juice, because you know he wants to sell products to tourists. You've walked this whole way up this hill. You must be tired. Here, have a water. Peso. All right. These cracks of capitalism all over the place.
There goes the neighborhood.
And the tourism coming into Cuba is really rocking the boat. A taxi driver can make 10 times what a surgeon makes. Or more. I mean, that is no exaggeration. A physician gets paid about $50 a month. I gave my Petty, the guy who rides bikes, taxi, I gave him $5 for a half hour of his time. 5 coops, which is the equivalent of $1. So he made in a half hour, he made $5 in a half hour, the doctor made $50 a month. Right? You get the idea. So Cuba is opening its doors to tourism because they need the tourist money. Right? And now that includes Americans like me and you. So when I learned that I was going to Cuba, I saw a video where a guy suggested, hey, bring some little gifts down there, they appreciate it. Okay, so in my email list I asked people to offer some basic supplies, you know, maybe some toiletries, maybe some little toys, maybe some school supplies. Everyone sent me school supplies, including my buddy Owen, who got his employer to match, so there's notebooks and colored pencils. And I went down to Cuba with these supplies, and I would give them out to the children of the neighborhood on the first of the year. I got the family who we stayed with, the children there, to reach out to their friends and have them all come by New Year's Day when school, the school was out for winter break. And they all came by, and I gave them notebooks, pencils, crayons, and then I would give the rest to a neighboring school. And I have a little video of that. I'll end my talk and this presentation with the story of Jesus. I was in Havana Park where I interviewed Juan, but I was there another time. Look, you have to go to the parks to get internet, so that was something I haven't mentioned yet. How you get internet in Cuba is you go to one of their Wi-Fi hotspots provided by the government. It's pokey, but you scratch off a card, and for $1 an hour, which is a lot of money to Cubans, you can get online and check your Facebook and that kind of thing. So I was doing that there, and so was this gentleman who had a shirt on that I noticed, and the shirt said, Minnesota State Fair. I said, I'm from Minnesota. And he said back in very good English, I was just there in August. He had just been to the State Fair. So he's also a guide, and he guides some individuals from St. Louis Park. And so they returned the favor, and he went up here to Minnesota, went to the State Fair, and boy did he love the State Fair. I mean, the abundance, right? Yeah. The foods, you know? His favorite part, though, was the livestock exhibit. He said he really liked seeing how proud people were of their animals. I thought that was nice. And this is from his apartment. I went up to his place the day after we met. And I interviewed him, and he said, tell your friends to come to Cuba. We're your neighbors. And I was just struck by that, you know, because we are neighbors, right? And it's not something that's been in my conscience my whole life, because the governments don't get along. But the beauty is we don't have to wait for our governments to get along, right? I mean, it'd be nice if they did, but it's not necessary, right? In fact, it's better if we don't wait for the governments to get along. That gives us the opportunity to go to Cuba with these guides, to reach out and connect with them, give them things if we're able. And then we get that one-on-one cultural experience. And you get to know Cuba, and you get to experience their world, and they get to experience also Americans, and everyone's better. That concludes the presentation, but that does not conclude the night. But tonight is about getting to know Cuba, and I'm just so grateful to have friends here, all of you, to learn and to enjoy the lessons that I bring back in the photos and the videos. Thanks again for everyone coming out tonight. We'll play some music. We'll get the fire outside started. We have a fireplace out in the patio area. We can smoke a cigar out there and just socialize, get drinks from the bar if you want, take some photos, and just enjoy yourselves. We can be here for another hour and a half or so. So we've got all time in the world. Thanks again.